And with that, I would like to introduce the first speaker of the day, who is Andrew McCarthy from the University of West England, who's gonna talk about his paper, Shouting Through Letterboxes.
Good morning, and it's great to be here at Cyber Science 2020. I'm Andrew McCarthy, and I'm currently a postgraduate researcher in the Computer Science Research Centre at the University of the West of England, where I recently completed my Masters in Cybersecurity, and this research is drawn from my Master's dissertation. And so the paper I'm presenting today is titled Shouting Through Letterboxes, a study on attack susceptibility of voice assistants. And so we explore how voice assistants could be exploited. And the structure of my presentation is my motivation and why this research matters, my methodology, the results, the limitations of the study, some conclusions, and some takeaways that I offer, and then I'll finish with further work. So why does this research matter? So machine learning systems are improving the efficiency of real-world tasks. Benefits are already being seen in autonomous vehicles, medical diagnostics, and indeed speech recognition. Household names like Amazon Echo and Google Home have become increasingly popular for home automation, and entertainment and convenience are key aspects of these devices. The devices process speech commands from users and then subsequently perform an action like playing music or making online purchases and switching on lights or other home automation tasks. Mapping speech input to the text commands is performed by a machine learning model. If such machine learning systems are going to be useful, then we must trust them. But unfortunately, bad people ranging from solo hackers to state-sponsored advanced persistent threats want to attack these systems. And as computer scientists and indeed society in general, we've got excited by the benefits of voice assistants, but have not fully considered the vulnerabilities of these systems. And so there's a current and a pressing need for research in this area. And through my literature review, I discovered that indeed people are doing interesting and relevant research in this area. And I'll give a sort of overview of what I found here. Voice interfaces are becoming more common for casual users. They're now on our phones, on our desktop and our laptop computers. Alepis and Patsakis indeed argued that voice assistants are actually replacing traditional user interfaces such as keyboards. Voice impersonation is possible and worryingly accurate and easy to produce. In fact, last year, fraudsters tricked a British energy firm into transferring cash into a fraudulent bank account through the use of artificial intelligence software that mimicked the executive's distinctive accent and actually tricked the energy firm into transferring into a fraudulent bank account. Adversarial examples have traditionally been seen in image processing environments. And recent research is now moving into attack voice-controlled systems. For example, Commander Song now is able to insert voice commands into music videos, and the Dolphin attack has been shown to compromise voice assistants by modulating the voice commands into ultrasonic frequencies and rendering them inaudible to humans in the room, although the microphone of the voice assistant actually picks up these ultrasonic sounds, and the voice assistant actually will action them. So this is a relatively new area of study that I think will be important in the future. And for these reasons, I wanted to explore how adversarial attacks could be made against voice assistants. This is the topic that we study in the in the paper. So on the next slide, our study has two main contributions, and our first contribution is a survey. And we think that the personal nature of voice assistants means that users are less cautious when using them. And we aim to test this hypothesis that users adopt a weaker security posture when using voice assistants. And our questionnaire focused on topics of security and privacy, and the questionnaire, along with the results, can be found in our repository at the link at the bottom of the slide. And on the next slide, I show the results of the survey, and the results were quite interesting. So we found that users generally haven't trained their voice assistant to uniquely identify their voice. Users generally don't mute their device when not in use. And the Pareto chart shows on the left the most popular locations for voice assistants. And there have been well-publicized instances of Apple contractors hearing intimate sounds during voice grading trials. And it's interesting to note the third most popular location for voice assistants is bedrooms, traditionally one of the most private spaces in the home. All participants of the survey confirmed there was at least one other nearby device, which increases the attack surface for adversaries. So we can see in the web chart, laptop computers, telephones and answer phones, and televisions are all commonly co-located with voice assistants. And so on the next slide, I'll detail how we can exploit this information. So this leads us on to our second contribution. And our second contribution consists of a selection of exploratory experiments. And we discovered that voice assistants are vulnerable to pretty simplistic attacks. Sound travels through air, which is effectively an open channel. It's not encrypted. Anyone can eavesdrop on it. And replay attacks are easily achieved. We were able to successfully trigger the voice assistant through a range of experiments. So answer phones, I was able to phone and leave a message on an answer phone that was able to trigger a voice assistant. Given that answer phones can trigger voice assistants, we could conceive of speculative widespread attacks using perhaps an automatic dialer to play pre-recorded messages to exploit voice assistants that are within proximity of an answer phone. And a good example of how TVs could trigger a voice assistant is the notorious South Park episode where some unusual items added to shopping lists. And if you haven't seen this particular episode, you should definitely check it out. There were some camouflage attacks that I performed where the waveform of, for example, Alexa stopped is very similar to the waveform for Alexa stop. And in this way, I was able to activate the voice assistant, but also hide my true intentions using a different phrase. Adding adversarial noise, I'll come on to later in a few slides, and shouting through letters is the topic of the next slide. So this is this is the title experiment of the paper. So our survey showed that voice assistants are located in hallways, and this video shows that the voice assistant can be triggered by unauthorized users from outside the home. So if the video could play, we can see
Alexa,
that
shuffling your music
the voice
on Amazon Music.
the voice assistant actually triggers from me shouting through the letterbox from outside the home. So there's potential here to unlock connected smart doors or operate other connected IoT devices. And indeed, I was able to trigger and switch on the lamp as well using a smart plug through shouting through the letterbox as well. And so on the next slide, I show the, as I promised, the adding adversarial noise. And so the objective here is to add adversarial noise, moving samples closer to a decision boundary. So I wrote some Python scripts using the speech recognition package. And basically the process there was I took 100 common English words, recorded those on my laptop and saved them as WAV files. I then passed these WAV files to the speech to text API using the Google speech recognition API. Subsequently, I added dense white noise to these samples, save that as a separate WAV file, and then pass that WAV file again to the speech to text API. Comparing the transcriptions that came out as the text output from the API, I was able to show that the Google speech recognition system can be influenced through adversarial noise. So each 5-second clip has a sample rate of 41 kilohertz. And obviously this is a large number of independent variables. And so it's quite difficult to assess the overall variability between samples. And so I used principal component analysis to perform dimensionality reduction, which provided a more intuitive approach to compare the samples. And so this is the slide showing the principal component analysis. The left plot shows 100 pairs of audio files. So the original clips are shown in red, and the modified or noisy clips are shown in blue. And we can see there that the effect of adding adversarial noise moves the samples within the subspace. And so the plot on the right focuses on the words think and thing. And the red dot on the left represents the word thing. And the red dot on the right represents the word think. And as I said, the objective here is to add adversarial noise to move samples closer to a decision boundary. And by adding carefully crafted noise, we will ultimately shift samples over a notional decision boundary, which is represented by the circle, the hashed circle. So I'll now play some audio samples, and we'll see that the adversarial noise hasn't changed the human interpretation of the word. Thing. So that's the original, and then here's the modified. Thing. And it's a bit crackly, but it's easily understood by humans, and it hasn't changed our interpretation of the word. So our limitations, we had looking at the questionnaire, the sampling wasn't random, and if I was to do the research again, I'd make efforts to ensure that the sample was truly random. This also had a knock-on effect with the significant male gender bias. and the sample size is relatively small. There were 40 participants, which is enough to give us an idea of trends that might be going on within the population of voice assistant users, but certainly a larger sample size would be more preferable. So on the next slide, my conclusion. So we've shown that a system could manipulate an audio sample such that the difference is inaudible to humans, but causes the output of a machine learning model to significantly differ. And our survey showed that participants don't mute their devices when they're not in use, and they don't train their voice assistants to uniquely recognize their voice. So we then posit that users do adopt a weaker security posture when they're using voice assistants, and our alternative hypothesis H1 gains credibility in that way. And so on the next slide, I'd like to offer some takeaways for you to consider. So voice as a user interface is inherently insecure, mainly because voice has to travel over an open channel through the air. And so the threat to voice assistants is an under-recognized risk. We also found that the practice of users is at odds often with their stated preferences. So for example, users were saying that security and privacy were key aspects that they were interested in, but then they were installing voice assistants in bedrooms. Adversarial noise attacks are viable, and it's possible to nudge audio samples closer to and ultimately over a decision boundary, and voice assistants can be triggered through audio from nearby devices. And so, thank you. On the future work, our future work investigates the nature of adversarial attacks in machine learning and how greater protections can be developed through to combat these threats. Basically, hopefully to identify these false inputs before they're accepted as an input into the learning models. And certainly I'd like to do some more experimentation there and how to modify an audio sample so that it's fully recognized as a voice command. So thanks for listening. That's the end of my presentation. I can't see you, but I'm imagining riotous applause. If there's any questions, I'll answer them now. And please don't forget to follow me on Twitter. I'm trying to build up a community of like-minded researchers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's been very interesting. Just a reminder for all attendees that if they want to ask any question, you can use the Q&A option at the bottom of the screen. Right now, we have few questions for you. Some of the attendees are wondering why you consider that people are less concerned about using voice assistant systems.
So some of that thought actually comes from when people talk about themselves, they're far more likely to reveal aspects of their life when they're chatting, whereas if you're being interrogated, you tend to potentially shut down a bit. And the nature of these voice assistants, they're in your home, they're almost a second person to chat with, and basically, yeah, thinking that these devices are there in your home, they're constantly listening, you tend to potentially forget that they're there sometimes, and also to reveal things about yourself without actually realizing that you're doing it.
Good. Another question is, how pervasive are these voice assistants? Are they able to pick up voice commands from the neighbor or someone passing by?
So certainly, I think my experiments were shown from sort of a 3-meter distance. You can certainly activate voice assistants. Obviously, it kind of depends on how loud you can make the voice command. So I think there have been studies where police in certain countries have been using loud hailers from helicopters to actually trigger voice assistants on mobile phones. And I guess it depends how close your neighbors are as well. And if both windows are open, it's, I think, yeah, potentially plausible that you could trigger a neighbor's voice assistant kind of unintentionally or perhaps intentionally. Certainly, I've got some friends who they can hear their neighbor talking to their voice assistant just over the road.
Great. Some other attendees, they are asking if you remember the sample size of the research.
Yeah, so there were 40 participants.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's not so small as you were mentioning, but yeah, I mean, it's good enough. Also, we have a comment from Petra, who is saying, is thanking you because you convinced her not to get any voice assistant device. Another question from me, which is, do you consider that there are any different types of voice assistants which are more dangerous than others? Mainly because of the limitations of the commands they can perform, or if there are some that they are more restrictive and they only allow you to perform certain commands, or if that's going to change on time?
So I think this is one of the things that's changing over time. So voice assistants, as I said, are now becoming almost ubiquitous, really. So they're on mobile phones, and the danger of the voice assistant kind of, as you rightly say, comes down to what commands do they are they able to action. So, for example, phones can post to social media through voice. You can switch televisions on, change channels with voice. So I think looking as well at voice assistants are also sort of being installed into cars. And I think in the future, depending what these systems will do, like if you're using a sat nav, and can you steer someone away without them realizing by having an adversarial example presenting a voice command to say, go to the industrial estate where some adversary could be waiting there to murder you or rob you, and the car would actually drive there and you'd be none the wiser. So I think it's an area that's interesting, and it's going to expand in the future. I think, you know, that there are areas that are already kind of quite concerning, where you're able to use phones, and you're able to get call log lists from Apple and Siri phones without actually needing to log into the phone. And it will actually use your voice commands to give you the call list or who owns that device, which is being used by police forensics and people to get information on a case.
One thing that I experienced myself is that usually when you have a new device, it's a bit more harder that it understands you the first time. I guess that they have, or they are using some machine learning processing in the background just to probably understand better which commands you perform, or what's your feedback from the commands that they've been performing. do you think that that could be further used to provide more security, like recognizing voices of specific people, or just limiting the commands given different context?
So I think the danger there really is that, as we've seen, voice imitation attacks are easily done. And so actually just recognizing the voice, I don't think is enough. And I think going forward, we're going to need to look at things like liveness detection and make sure that there is an actual human being there, potentially comparing video and audio samples to ensure that that's the command that's being said. I've seen other papers that talk about throat microphones. And I think, liveness detection is potentially what needs to happen.